Hello and welcome back to the channel. Welcome back to Anatomy of a Classic, the series where we break down a classic album bit by bit. Today I'm joined by Patrick, making his first appearance on the channel. And as you can see behind him, he's a fan of Curtis Mayfield. So I decided, so am I, obviously. If you saw my favorite album series, you'll know this album that we're talking about today ranked very high, and I don't see that many people talking about it, but the people I know it all love it, right? That's the kind of thing with this album. So we're doing his debut solo album. Curtis is the title, and I'm really excited to get into this. Patrick, thanks for coming on, and I will lead it to you to begin how you came to discover the album. What's your history with the album and with Curtis in general?
Awesome. Thank you, Tom. Thank you for having me on your channel. And thank you for asking me to discuss and share thoughts about this album because I do love it so much. It's definitely one of my favorite albums. Certainly would be in the top five for 1970, the year it was released. Curtis, to me, is probably on the Mount Rushmore of R&B and soul and funk for the early to mid 70s. We're talking a rarefied era up here, right? To me, Curtis belongs with Al Green, Marvin Gaye, Stevie Wonder. They uh, they really pushed R&B and soul forward with politically conscious message. Curtis was unique, though. I think he stands out from those other three in several ways. I came to know this album and Curtis in particular through college radio, believe it or not. This is so, I'm gonna just expose my age here. This there was a time before Spotify, there was a time before Napster, and I know that people like to talk about gatekeepers. Music in particular was under tight lock and control from album-oriented rock and a very narrow lineup and agenda that radio was pushing, in particular in the 70s. I grew up in the Midwest and in predominantly white small town Bible Belt, and so certainly R&B and soul. If I didn't have college, I also grew up in a college town though, so if it wasn't for college radio, I would not have been exposed to this fantastic music, especially from the 70s. So I first got into it through Stevie Wonder. I was a drummer for a long period in my life, and the groove on Superstition just hooked me, grabbed me by the throat, and I had to know who was playing drums. I had to know who that was singing. I had to know. I started doing a deep dive into Stevie's catalog and exploring who inspired Stevie, who was an influence on Stevie, and Curtis was definitely up there. Started exploring Marvin Gaye, started exploring Al Green, and then started exploring Curtis. Was familiar with a couple of songs. You Got Soul from and People Get Ready from when he was with the Impressions. But Curtis has such a distinct personality and is so musically gifted and unique in his own way. The way he tunes his guitar is totally he's totally in and of himself. It's a like an F sharp tuning. It's an open tuning. It's very strange. And the people playing with him on this solo album, there there's stories about them just wondering what key are we in because I cannot figure this out. And we'll cover this later. But Curtis is just such a unique individual, very positive. I can't wait to get into this album to discuss why it's so different, and it stands apart from Stevie. It stands apart from Marvin as well. It was certainly on the bleeding edge at the time. This album was released in 1970, so we're talking several years before Sly and the Family Stone. There's a riot going on, or Marvin Gaye's What's Going On, and covering the same topics. I think Curtis, I agree with you. I don't think Curtis gets talked about enough. His influence is so pervasive, so wide. His guitar playing was a huge influence on Jimi Hendrix. And I think that it's a shame because Curtis has a story to tell, a message to tell. He's so talented. His music is so wonderful. It's beautiful to listen to, even if you're not paying attention to the content of the message. It's ear candy. It's slinky, it's funky, it's groovy, and it's got so much soul, Chicago soul. And you know, there was in the town I grew up in, this college radio station had an R&B and soul a 3 hour block of R&B and soul, and they would play deep cuts, artists that I'd never heard of before, and that's basically how I got started through this. Sorry, I'm going back and forth here. I'm too much. I'm thinking about too many things with Curtis. I love the man so much.
No, I love
Sorry,
it.
Tom.
It's good to hear about your history with an artist for sure. Yeah. Um,
But yeah, it's tough with no streaming, right? At this time, that it's like how do I get to explore this music? And besides, you know, paying attention to college radio, listening to my friends who were older, people that I knew that loved music and loved R&B and soul, they basically were they highly recommended Curtis, and I'm glad that I took them up on that.
um,
So, how did you find out about Curtis, and how did you find out about this album?
Very good question. It's interesting here that we're doing this together because we came to Curtis in very different ways. My exposure to Curtis, the very first exposure to Curtis before even knowing who he was hearing Touch the Sky by Kanye West, which of course samples move the horns from Move On Up, slows them down. One of his best samples for sure. Very sort of cool how he distorts the music, but then turns it into something completely new. And Touch the Sky, when I was super into Kanye, which I'm not as much anymore for reasons to do with the music and to do with the man. Um, that was probably my favorite Kanye West song, and a lot of the reason was those horns. And it was actually a YouTube video I watched, uh, which was like dissecting all of Kanye's samples on College Dropout
Ah,
and then Late Registration. It was like where everything came from, and then he was like, "Yeah, Move On Up is where Touch the Sky came from," and I was like, "Oh, I'll go listen to that Move On Up song." And then I heard it, and I was like, "Oh no, I know this. I do know this. It's just that I didn't make the connection." And as soon as I saw that album cover, it is so stylish and cool, and it just drew my eyes immediately. I was like, "Wow, this guy is a confident guy. He, it's just very aesthetically pleasing. It's there behind Patrick, and yeah, I was like, okay, I love this single. I'm going to listen to the album. You get a 9 minute version of that song on the album, and yeah, it was love at first listen. Um, it was the first Curtis Mayfield album I listened to, so maybe that has a bit,
mm,
pardon the pun, impression on why it is my favorite, right? Rather than Superfly, or he has a lot of other great ones too that don't get talked about as much, like Sweet Exorcist and
Roots, I think, is good too.
yeah, there's no place.
That's the album in between this one and
Mhm.
Superfly. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no place like America Today is also really
Mm.
good. So, but yeah, this is my favorite one, and but I'm a massive Curtis super fan, and yeah, especially that run he had from 1968 with the Impressions up until sort of 75. All those albums in that time span are incredible. So, yeah, I'm glad that we're doing this because the albums I've done so far. I'm not saying this is like an undiscovered album. It's critically acclaimed. It's beloved, but it is not put in the same breath as What's Going On or Talking Book or whatever. And I think that's even Superfly gets a bigger critical acclaim than this album. I feel like
Yes,
so.
I agree. But I think I agree with you, Tom. I think this album belongs right up there with What's Going On, Talking Book.
Hmm, yeah. So this is where I do a little bit of a background spiel. And speaking with Patrick off air, I think you have something to contribute to this section as well. So I'll just ramble on, then you can ramble on, and then we'll have a nice time talking about Curtis. So I read up about the making of this album. He actually never intended to leave the Impressions permanently, but once this album came out, and it was a moderate success, but the critical success was much better than the commercial success, and he had advice from his manager to leave the Impressions, which he did in 1971, the year after this came out. Um, yeah, he was, like you mentioned, he was one of the earliest artists to speak openly about African American pride and community struggle, which really, you could just talk about the music all day, but the cultural significance of the album cannot be underestimated either. Like you said, this is before What's Going On, which is credited as being one of the most important political albums of all time. This came out a year before it, It was a year after Stand by Sly and the Family Stone, but it was before their big, big political statement, which was There's a Riot Going On. So, yeah, he was really ahead of the game musically and topically. It's funny that the topic of the album is it was timely and it's timeless at the same time. Um, and then yeah, in terms of personnel, lots of incredible session musicians supporting Curtis here. The playing on this album is incredible. You mentioned the grooves, but the star of the show, as it should be, is Curtis. Depending on the day, might be my favorite singer ever. Like he's right up there with my all-time favorites. I think I did draft up a singers list, and I think my top three were Tom York, Harry Nilsson, and Curtis Mayfield. And of those three, it could jump around between them, but really nothing in this genre beats his silky, smooth falsetto for me. So yeah, that's kind of what I got in terms of the background of the album. If you want to add anything.
I don't know. That was great. I totally agree. His falsetto is so natural, so smooth. It almost he does it so effortlessly. He sounds like it sounds like it's not a falsetto at all. It is, but he doesn't strain, he doesn't push it, and it's just beautiful. And some of the messages that he pushes through that falsetto are harsh. And in fact, he opens this album with quite a harsh statement. And we'll get to that in a moment. I think this stuff was certainly swelling up inside of him while he was in the Impressions. I think he felt that the Impressions style of music, even though he was primary songwriter for all those like People Get Ready, he was the man that developed the creative path for the Impressions. I think he felt that he wanted to bring in more urbane sounds, in particular Latin grooves and soul, or a funkier soul, basically Chicago soul, a grittier Chicago soul, than would fit his group at the time. But you're right, he did not want to leave the Impressions. In fact, the Impressions are with him on this album. They're singing backup with him on this album. It wasn't until after this album that his manager essentially talked him into going solo. Curtis he's got a heart of gold. He's a wonderful human being. And I think this album, you're right. It's not that it's ignored. It's not that it's, some type of classic underground album that nobody knows per se, but it certainly is not included in those early great R&B and soul gems from Stevie and Marvin, and it belongs right there. And in fact, it was an inspiration and an influence on both of them. I know Marvin Gaye heard this album before before he came up even with the idea of What's Going On. And I know this album had to have been a huge influence, particularly on Marvin Gaye. I'm certain of it. The amazing thing is that while Marvin had to fight to get that out because he was under the tight control of Berry Gordy from Motown, right? And Berry did not want to get political. He did not want to get social. He wanted Motown to remain nice and clean and appealing to the white kids. And that couldn't hold. That was not going to hold. Curtis had his own label. Curtis could do what he wanted. And Curtis had the agency to get what he wanted in terms of his artistic vision pushed through without many roadblocks. And that doesn't mean that doesn't make this album any less spectacular, right? And I think maybe that's part of the problem It was critically acclaimed, but did you go through and read like Rolling Stone's initial review of
We'll get
this?
there. We'll get there. Don't worry.
Okay, unbelievable. Even Christgau, right? I'm not a big fan of Robert Christgau, but sometimes he can have some. He's got some keen and accurate insights. This one, he was way off, way off. Um, there was obviously racism coming through on some of that, and you can read it. And Christgau, I think, apologized for it later. It's interesting. This album, as sweet and soulful as Curtis was, it definitely was divisive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Very, very well put, especially with the reviews. Yeah, it'll be interesting to get to that talking point later.
Yeah. Yep.
um, but this is going to be the sixth episode of this series, and people who have been watching it along will realize that reading the initial Rolling Stone review and realizing that they are way off is not. This isn't the first episode where that's happened. Very harsh to Neil Young, to Kate Bush at the time. Just, yeah, bizarre. But lead single is where we start. And much like Hounds of Love, the lead single is also the opening track. Don't worry, if there is a hell below, we're all going to go. I mean, what a title to open your own one. And obviously, it opens in a very challenging way for 1970, where Curtis is just yelling these sort of colloquial nicknames, I suppose, if you want to call them that, or slurs or whatever.
I mean,
Yeah,
he spares no one. He spares
exactly.
no ethnicity, no cultural group whatsoever,
Yeah,
right? And no, he starts out by screaming derogatory terms for every racial group.
yeah, and you start with this song, which, if you were familiar with the impressions, put our heads as someone in 1970 who's familiar with the impressions. Oh, Curtis is going solo. I want to hear his nice, smooth solo soul music, and this is the lead single. It's so unrelenting. Is the sign of an artist with a new sense of direction, with a new sort of, I don't know what the word is. It's very challenging. Well, I guess it's not as challenging now because of what came after it, right? But it would have been very challenging at the time. The bass line is so iconic. The doom 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 is so good. Just powers through the song. You can't help but sort of, even though it is a very political song, it's still a really groovy track. It's about 7 minutes, right? The band on this track are incredible. And yeah, I guess the big thing to me, I didn't know what the lead single was, but I'm pretty sure everybody who listens to this album would assume that the lead single was "Move On Up," right?
Blowing up, right? Yeah.
Which, because that is the most obviously commercial song on the album. But no, he wanted to put his best foot forward in of what he thought and his message, and man, what a way to introduce people to your solo career. It is a different Curtis. It is a rejuvenated Curtis for sure on this song. But yeah, it's very memorable as well, despite its sort of long jamming nature as well.
Yes. Yeah.
Mm.
And right at the start of this song, after just throwing out derogatory term after derogatory term, he just lets out this blood curdling scream, and its intention is quite clear, right? He's putting a boot up your butt and trying to get you to open your mind. The Funkadelics' second album, "Free Your Ass and Your Mind Will Follow." This is Curtis's message too. And what I love about this song is that it's basically no one gets out of here alive. No one goes unscathed. We all are to blame. We all have our problems, every single one of us, and we're all going to hell. So why not? Why not change the course? Why not understand how we're all connected and how we can actually improve our own lives in the here and now, in the present? And the first half of this album, I think, and this is the perfect opener for it, right, is just basically It goes beyond a political or a social message. It's basically, it's warning. It's Curtis on his soapbox too, and that's fine. That's fine. He's got a great message. I'm willing to accept it. And in particular, with the music behind it, the funk, the horn. I mean, he's got everything in here. He's got horns. He's got strings. He's
Harp.
got the beautiful backing vocals. Yes, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, just the harp as well. Yeah.
Yes, the harp. I know. I know. It's amazing. It is amazing. He includes everything. He's a wonderful arranger. He puts it all together. You can hear all of the instruments. They're all playing sympathetically towards a common goal, and he makes it funky on top of it, which is just mind blowing. I love the Latin inspired percussion throughout this album. Lots of congas. The musicians on, you're right, the musicians on this album are spectacular. He's got a huge list of musicians from the Chicago area playing here, and he doesn't even credit them with one particular instrument. He just goes down the line and just says musician, musician, musician. And it's a collective whole, but it is Curtis, the personality of Curtis. It is the brilliance of his songwriting coming through, I think. This is a great opener to any album, and to this one in particular. It sets the tone for what's to come. There's some deviation along the way. There's a love song on here that I also enjoy very much, but this song is telling you, I've got a message, and we're all guilty, and we're all going to listen to it. And I I can see a path forward, and it's grounded in love and understanding and compassion and respect for your fellow human being. I can't think of a more wonderful message, frankly.
Yeah, no.
I hate to sound all hippie and crunchy about it, but I love Curtis because of this. Yeah, it's so intricately tied to him and his artistic vision, I think.
It feels so genuine as well, right? Like I think
Yes.
whenever a big artist comes out with a big political statement, it can either be feel genuine or it can feel sort of forced, right? And
Disingenuous, absolutely.
this is one of the most genuine political statements I think you will find. And yeah, I mean, it is an incredible track, and I hate to move on from it so soon because there's so much to talk about with it. But
Yeah.
we do a whole episode just on one song from this album, right? So and for a while, I will say that that was not my favorite song on the album because I was drawn towards the more sort of soul inspired tracks rather than the funk. But yeah, right now I'd probably make my top 3 or 4 on the album. It's fantastic, but nowadays when I listen to it, I get so into that song, and then I remember that stuff I like more is still to come. Um, Speaking of which, favorite deep cut. I'll go first on this. Um, if you haven't watched the show before, this is kind of where we like to highlight a non-single, non-opener or closer. Something in the middle of the album somewhere that we really enjoy, that we want to shine a light on, that we think deserves it. And for me, Patrick kind of alluded to it. The Makings of You, the outlier on side 1. I just love that Curtis made this like these 7 incredible political songs, and then he's like, "I'm just going to put on one of the greatest love songs of all time, just casually, just for that track 3, I guess." Um, it This was an instant win for me. The opening with the strings and the horns, and of course the harp, adds this like almost Wizard of Oz type like feeling to it. It's so mystical but also grounded in reality. Um, and to me, this he has so many great vocal performances, but nothing beats this. This is just incredible. When he comes in with the "add a little sugar" line, I'm not even going to try and imitate it because that is only he can do it. And it as soon as that first vocal line comes in, I have chills and I'm in for the rest of the song. The lyrics are incredibly touching, so well written. Like whenever he did do
Yes.
a love song, he could express it like nobody else.
Yes,
I
and
just,
quite concise, I think, in its lyricism too, right?
yeah,
Very effective, very simple, very direct,
mm,
but beautiful. Yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead,
for
sorry.
sure, yeah, yeah, and like I said, just for me, one of the greatest love songs of all time is and I think the proof in that is that yes, the arrangement is fantastic. Of course, we haven't mentioned this is self-produced as well, which is remarkable that this guy was writing all these songs, singing them to perfection, and arranging and producing them to perfection, which is just. But the arrangement, of course, is masterful. But the live version on Curtis Live, where it's just him and his
Mm,
guitar,
yes.
is also like just as good.
Yeah.
And
Maybe even better.
maybe even better, like
Yeah.
because you've
Yeah.
got the crowd, you can there are a couple of women in the crowd who are getting quite into it, and you can tell it's just like they've been woo throughout the song, which I don't know, it kind of adds a special element to it. And yeah, I mean, it's just flawless. And if you don't want to commit to the album just based on our discussion, I would say listen to this song, and then you will realize that you have to listen to this album because holy smokes, what a great song. What's your pick for the deep cut?
Well, that's a great pick, Tom. Makings of You, it's so, and of course that sweet falsetto of his, it just fits in perfectly with that song. My favorite deep cut of this album would be Give It Up, which is the final song on this album. I think I like it because again, it has a heavy Latin percussion drive to it, but also it's a great final statement for this album, and it it basically is a message of personal responsibility. And I have to give up, I got to give it up. I got to give up the negativity. I got to give it up. I got to give up the cynicism. I got to give up the victimhood. I've got to, all of these things that he's been trying to say on the previous songs and throughout the entire album. It's unlike a more observational tone that he takes throughout most of the songs here. This, I think, is a more personal tone for him, and it's reflective. I think it's more inner looking, and again, he's saying, "I'm no better than anybody else. I have, I harbor these feelings. I have this, I can have this cynicism and this disgust over, what's happening in my country, what's happening with my people, what's happening in society, and I have to give this up. We all have to give this up. It just feeds on itself, and it's going to make things worse. And I think it's easy for um, it's easy for people to gravitate towards social message songs and or message songs in general, where there is animosity and hatred towards some other. It gives you sort of and they have their place, but here I think it's almost the exact opposite message. And I think it has just as much power to it. Again, lyrics are fantastic. Obviously, love his guitar playing on it as well. Love his guitar throughout. He's such a good guitarist. He was a polymath. He could pick up many instruments and learn them without being taught. And I know that he even learned to play piano before he learned to play guitar. And he didn't really learn it. He was self-taught, which is where that tuning, that different open tuning style comes from. It fits his voice perfectly. It throws other people while they're playing with him. It's funny, but it's so unique to him. And it was so influential. He ends up being named as one of the in the top whatever 100 lists of guitarists. He always shows up because it's not just his songwriting, it's not just his arranging or his voice. He's got the musicianship to back it up too. Um, and
That's
I love this final song. It's a great closer for an album, I think.
yeah, that's a great point. I've never actually I enjoy his guitar playing, right? But because there's so much
Right.
else to appreciate, I've never really like focused in on it, especially on this album because the arrangements are so grand and dense and there's so much texture that I think the guitar is quite in the background for a lot of the time.
It is. It is.
Yeah, I mean, great pick for the deep cut, which is a great transition for me because we now talk about the closing track. So I guess I'll add my thoughts. The For me, "Give It Up" is not one of my favorites on the album, but there's 8 songs and they're all fantastic, right? Like some of the line at the bottom.
Exactly.
I don't know if it would be at the very bottom. We'll get to that. But the album flies by so fast that it always sucks to get to this song because you're like, oh, it's ending. It's like a 37-minute album. You only got 8 songs. But yeah, you're right. It's the perfect way to close the album and beyond all the context behind the song and what he was singing about, which was very important. It just is a memorable, strong chorus. Like the first time I heard it, I was immediately like singing it in my head. So yeah,
Yeah.
it
Very
works so
hummable.
well as a closing track, like you said. It's sort of like a final thesis statement on his opinion of America, which I mean, to do that in a 3-minute song is pretty great, and not just with his love songs, like you said, he's able to be concise and to the point and direct. And then that leads us to the impact on music history, which I'm sure we'll have a very interesting discussion with this. Um, the sort of initial impact, the edited version of Move On Up spent 10 weeks in the UK top 50. I don't think it charted in the US. I might be wrong there. Um,
I didn't. Yeah.
okay, yeah. I know the opening track did chart, but not particularly well and not for very long.
Mhm.
You mentioned the initial Rolling Stone review. I've got it copy and pasted in my notes here. Um,
Sweet.
Fragmentary, garbled, and frustrating to listen to. He tries to deal with some pretty serious and complex subjects by stringing together phrases that end with the same sound, whether they make sense together or not. Sure, it's all subjective, but I can't myself see that what we need is respect for the steeple, power to the people. Um, yeah, it's
Wow. You
just
have to
bizarre.
wonder if he even listened to this album. It just that's I don't know what he was listening to.
Well,
He definitely go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say he probably just hyper fixated on that one pair of lines, which aren't even that much of a stretch of a rhyme, and was like, "Oh, that's the whole album." Because I can't think of another instance where the lyrics are that like stretching for a rhyme, at all.
They
These songs
sound
are
natural to
so,
me. They
yeah.
sound unforced. Yes, I agree. I don't that does that's crazy. Anyway, go ahead.
And then,
Wow.
of course, in typical Rolling Stone fashion, we keep mentioning these Rolling Stone reviews, and then the albums end up on their top 500 albums lists. That's interesting. So in the latest list, it was number 275, which is a fair placement. I think it's high enough that people are going to take notice and be like, if they haven't heard it, maybe check it out. So I appreciate that. I would personally have it higher, but that's fine. And it is largely considered one of the all-time great soul albums. And yeah, like we mentioned, never brought up in the same breath as "What's Going On" or Stevie Wonder's classic "Run." But for me, is my favorite of the genre, bar none. It is 8 tracks. They're all fantastic, perfectly produced, perfectly sung, perfectly played, just top notch. So yeah, that's how I feel on it.
I think you quoting back that Rolling Stone review, and we were talking about Chris Gow's review too. For some reason, they come across they sound patronizing, and that's being generous. But they somehow have labeled Curtis with being disingenuous, which you had mentioned it earlier, Tom. It's mind blowing because if there's anything that comes through, it's his sincerity. And it does sound sincere. It sounds like it's from the heart. And you cannot fake that. I don't know what they were listening to at the time. And, I haven't read their I haven't even read Rolling Stone's subsequent reviews of like What's Going On or Talking Book, and I've not read Chris Gow's reviews of that either. But I'm sure that they probably cut Marvin Gaye and Stevie Wonder a lot more slack than they did Curtis. Curtis, I worked in Chicago for almost 4 years, and I worked very close to where Curtis grew up, which was Cabrini Green, and it was poster project for everything rotten and wrong about government housing and government projects. And um, to the reviews written about this album make it sound like Curtis has lived a life of privilege or something. It's just crazy. It's just it's just it's nasty and it's wrong. And I'm glad that Rolling Stone in particular changed their attitude towards it, and it makes sense. They've been wrong many times on their initial reviews, right? And a lot of critics can fall into those traps, I think. Um, and yeah, I mean, this album also, to its credit, I think it pays for a revisit and a re-listen over and over again. There's so much going on. Like you'd said, I never really paid attention to his guitar. It doesn't stand out. He's not a flashy guitarist. He's obviously not a shredder. Um, and a lot of the times he's playing rhythm for the most part. And it was always complimentary because for over a decade, he was in the Impressions, right? And he wrote for them. He was always very generous songwriter and a very generous performer. Always letting the Impressions, not trying to upstage them. And this comes through, I think, on the solo album. The musicians backing him up. Everybody is complimenting everybody else. It sounds surprisingly tight and composed, considering how much is going on, who has to offer, and how many people are playing on this album. It doesn't come across as like a horse designed by a committee, right? With
Yeah.
like the head of a zebra and the back end of a donkey or whatever. This is like, this is a concise, a complete whole of a statement, which is it just this was I would like to say it's lightning in a bottle on this album, but that's not true because Mayfield had great albums after this too.
Yeah, I think in terms of the complexity of the arrangements, I think in that the complexity and density of the arrangements, he never quite got to this level again for me. But you're right. The records that come after this, Roots, Superfly, Back to the World, Sweet Exorcist, No Place Like America Today, all those albums are great. So he was, yeah, it's not quite lightning in a bottle, but yeah, it's pretty special. And then track ratings. We are gonna rate the tracks individually. I'm gonna kick us off with side one, then you'll go for your side one ratings, and then side two, side two. So for me, side one, don't worry if there is a hell below, we're all going to go. Easy 10 out of 10 for me. No question about it. Other side of town is the one I've got as a 9. Really prominent harp to open the song. Again, I mentioned Wizard of Oz. That was kind of the vibe I was getting on this listen. As the harp is sort of so dominant before the groove settles in, and you're suddenly transported to the streets of Chicago with Curtis, the sort of lone, observant protagonist. Immediately, this is a more somber tone than anything he'd done with the Impressions, which, yeah, very, very atmospheric and sort of deep song. Yeah, love it. But can't give everything a 10, so it gets a 9. The Makings of You, obviously, a 10. It was my favorite deep cut. And then closing side one, another longer song, We the People Who Are Darker Than Blue, which I think for a while would have been my least favorite on the album. Uh,
Hmm.
Not anymore. Absolutely not. 10 out of 10. Starts off as this great sort of smoky soul ballad before some percussion comes in, and you mentioned the Latin percussion. It starts building into this awesome groove. And it sort of builds momentum, and then the song is interrupted again by the heavenly harp. It's sort of so I don't want to say disjointed because it's all purposeful and it all fits together so well, but
Yeah.
it's meant to be jarring, right? You're meant to be transported from mood to mood within the song. It's got multiple parts. And yeah, I do think the harp is what sets this album apart sonically from his contemporaries. Like that's such a stroke of genius to put that
Hmm.
alongside these lyrics about all the things that were going on socially at the time. Um, and then yeah, it goes when the harp comes in, it kicks straight back into that sweet, sweet sort of soul ballad mood. It's just superb, and I was just in awe of it on this listen. So yeah, that's also a 10. Side one, incredible. What have you got?
Right. Yeah. Side one, very powerful. I think listening to it for the first time, I was like, is this album front loaded? I hope not. Because I was so impressed with every song coming down the line. I'm like, it just doesn't stop.
I was the
Wow.
same. I was exactly the same.
Again, don't worry if there's a hell below, we're all gonna go. And just a great song. You know, that blood curdling scream, those angry words. It's all intended to wake you up and put you into focus, and that's exactly what it does. Um, and it just is it maintains a consistent groove throughout the song. Slinky, very soulful, funky. That bass line, classic, very hummable. Get your butt moving, and groove does a lot for me. In fact, probably a lot than it does for quite a few people. If there's not, and there's fantastic melody changes here, chord changes throughout. It's not that this album doesn't have it or doesn't go anywhere, but I can sit back and let the groove take me over for a while. And maybe that's because I was a drummer, I don't know, but I definitely come at it from a perspective of what kind of feeling does the rhythm provide in a song? Because I can forgive it for missing some other things, for other deficiencies. If it's got a great groove, you got me hooked. And this album has it all, everything. The Other Side of Town. This is sort of like what do the simple folk do from Camelot, but turned on its head, contemporized, and well, I'll tell you what the simple folk do. We're not so simple at all, and we are living a pretty crappy life over here. Great message. I would give this song also a 10. I love this song. It's wonderful. And not one of the extended tracks like "Don't Worry" or "Move On Up." It wraps it up nicely. I think it's got a good flow and a feel to it. I love the strings on this song in particular. Um, of course, "The Makings of You," beautiful. That's a 10 for me. Wonderful song, beautiful song, and like within the same song itself that you mentioned earlier, Tom, especially for "We Are the People Who Are Darker Than Blue," he does those abrupt shifts of focus or those abrupt changes, right? Both in tempo and in terms of chords, the root chords being played and the melodies that he comes up with. Um, I think "The Makings of You" does that for the album, right? It's just like it's like it's just almost a 180. And it's intended, and it's beautiful. It's just a gorgeous song. And then "We Are the People Who Are Darker Than Blue." This takes a. I agree with you. It didn't catch me at first, although I liked it. It wasn't something that stayed with me until I had multiple revisits with this album, and I started to get it. And I love that. You're right. That funk breakdown in the middle. It's got a good mid-tempo soul momentum towards coming up on the middle part of this song, and all of a sudden, boom, there's this great funk breakdown, and it's just wonderful. This is like a suite of shorter songs put together into an overarching theme and a longer song, right? Again, another extended song. I think it's 6 minutes. I think it's a fantastic song. Love it. A great way to end the first side too.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And any fears we had that this was going to be a front-loaded album were alleviated. Was that a 10 for you? We the People as well?
Yes. Yep. Absolutely.
So side two starts with "Move On Up," and at this point in my first listen, I knew this song already. I loved the first. Well, like I said, "We the People" I didn't love at first, but I still loved it. What I mean? It's like comparing to these instant classics. And this was the song I knew, and obviously the first 3 minutes are the single, and then the song just drops out, and then you get the percussion coming in, and you get some really great rhythm guitar, and oh my god, the extended jam section is incredible. You can listen to the single version, and I enjoy the single version, And sometimes I'm only in the mood to listen to the 3 minutes of it, you know. But when you're in the mood for the 9 minutes of this song, it is unbeatable. The horns and lead melody are incredible, but I think for me the percussion takes this song to a whole other level. Just driving through the song is what caught my eye actually when I went back when I first heard the song after I was looking at the Kanye samples. Right, it was that really fast sort of percussion that was just
Yes.
instantly hooked me. Um, and I think this showcases the band's skill even further than any other song on the album. I think there's some sax late in the song, which is so
Yeah.
good,
Yeah.
so
That sax solo
unexpected.
towards the end. That's
Yeah,
awesome.
and it just builds and builds and builds in intensity the longer it goes on. And I was kind of worried that it wouldn't earn the 9 minutes because I loved that single version, but it does and then some. So easy 10. Then you get Miss Black America, which is of the shorter songs on the album, probably the most overtly political. And yeah, this is in terms of its message, it is one of my favorites on the album. I love the intro with the child speaking and the way the music just swells in. So cool. The lyrics are awesome. Again, Curtis's voice is just to die for. The arrangement, again, as is typical with this album, it's expansive, it's ambitious, it's dense. There's so much going on, but it never overpowers the core songwriting and Curtis's voice. It's always there to complement it, which is probably largely due to him self-producing and self-arranging. You know, he had that control over his own songs where, you know, he was never tempted to just chuck a string section where it didn't need to be there, you know. And then at the end of the song, the bass just goes absolutely
Oh,
wild. It's insane. And at this point in my first listen, this is also a 10, Miss Black America. I just want to say these are probably like the best scores I've given on this series. Because holy shit, this album is on my first listen through, this song ended and it was so emotionally resonant. I was like, man, this album might be like a 10 out of 10 first listen, which I'm quite a strict grader.
wow.
And I was like thinking about it, and then the horns that come in, the da 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 on Wild and Free, and I just had shivers all over my whole body, and I was like, yeah, this is one of the greatest albums of all time. And I know Wild and Free is often like considered one of the lesser tracks on the album, but for that reason alone, it has to be a 10. It just blew me away the first time. Like you get this beautiful like political message and it doesn't give you a moment to process it. It just goes straight into the next song, which is just so immediate, so filled with hooks. The horns are amazing. There's some really cool guitar on this as well, actually. Rhythm guitar parts, little fills, which I did make a note of. And to me, the shorter pop soul gems are just as good as the extended jams on this album. I think they really do. You know, the three longer songs kind of take up all the attention when in critical discourse of the album, but these shorter songs are such gems as well. And Wild and Free is one of my favorites. Just so good, so good. And then closing on Give It Up, which I do have as a 9, but that was more just so I didn't give every song a 10. I still love it, and I think it's a great place. That's where I land on side 2.
Awesome. Yeah, it is not a front-loaded album. Totally agree with you, Tom. Move on up. It's been used in commercials. It is, I think, it sort of sits in the back of your subconscious, and it just becomes an earworm the size of a dune sandworm. It becomes this overpowering creature that it's going to take at least a good night of sleep to get over. It is the first side. There is a difference, I think, in the message and the sound from the first side to the second side of this album, and I think this is like if the first side is full of darkness and gloom, which it's not full of, but it can be predominant in his message. That things are in really shitty shape. The second side is starting out with "Move On Up," just as positivity. Great. We need to shift our focus. We need to get our minds into a reality where we can actually make change, where we can look forward to our future. And this song is all about that. And you're right. The first 3 minutes is the single. Then that extended funk jam, the last 5 minutes or so of this is just spectacular. It's just awesome. You're right. Curtis's guitar here, fantastic. What a rhythm guitar. Just beautiful touch. So unique in that sound because of that open tuning. So personal to him. Just a wonderful, wonderful song. This is a 10 out of 10. Move on. Sorry, Miss Black America. What a great message. It sounds like he's talking to his daughter at the start of it, right? And then boom, it just opens up. Those horns are spectacular on this song. Um, I give the song a 9 out of 10. I maybe I wanted it to be a little longer. I don't know because it's so good. It's such a good groove. It's such a good feel to it. And I think it's a great message. I think it might, it might be a bit naive because it's this one. I think a lot of the songs on this album are timeless. This one is a little more of its time, I think, only because of the way that the pageant, the Miss America is looked at now. But Curtis is not patronizing. He's not demeaning. In fact, if anything, it's quite the opposite here. It's just that, you can be anything you want to be. You should have the highest goal set for yourself. It's a wonderful balance, I think, of a wonderful, wonderfully written song that's got catchy melodies and still has a very good message. It just keeps going with Wild and Free. Great song. The shortest song is, I think that's the shortest track on this album. I think it's like 3 minutes and 12 seconds or something like that. But it's great. And he's expressing what we all want to be. He covers all groups, everybody. He's got just a wonderful, powerful message for everybody. Give it up. Wild and Free, I also give a 9 too. It's great. I wouldn't remove, there's not one song, not one misplaced note on this album. I wouldn't give up anything on this album. Give it up itself, 10 out of 10 for me. Wonderful way to end an album. Love the groove, love the percussion on this in particular. And again, his guitar is a standout on this as well. I think it's just gosh, what a great album. It might have been on first listen to me. I don't even know if I was rating it. It caught me it's so dramatically. Something that, believe it or not, What's Going On did not do. This album I thought was much more compelling on it, in particular on its first listen, and it just pays and dividends on a revisit just because of the dense arrangements, but so beautifully done by Curtis here. Everything, horns, violins, right, string section. The impressions are doing the backing vocals on here. The guitars, the bass, the percussion, everything. It just comes into a beautiful whole. It's a wondrous album. Curtis didn't come out of nowhere, right? He'd been with the Impressions for over a decade. He'd started out very young, and he was older. Certainly, he was probably of a different generation, certainly than Al and Stevie. Marvin was doing it from the mid '60s, but he again was in that Motown. He was fitting in within that Motown formula, and I know that this album just had a huge impact on Stevie and Marvin in particular. I'm sure of it. Very, very, it definitely gets into your, Charles Mingus' first track on his album called A Hum is Get This Into Your Soul. Well, you get this into your soul, no doubt about it. And it stays with you for a very long time.
For sure, yeah. Like I said, I was immediately hooked on my first listen, and I agree with you on What's Going On. That it isn't an instant hook like this album is for me. Um, and the comparison is interesting because they're going for very different things musically.
Yes.
I think
Yes.
much of the social commentary is fairly similar. Musically, they're very different. Of course, you have the suite on What's Going On, and I like that album a lot. I'm a big fan of it, but I think where Curtis stands alone with this album is that every song has an individuality to it. You could return to any of these songs outside of the context of the album. I don't really think that's the case with what's going on, and that wasn't what
Yeah.
Martin was going for, right? That's just a personal preference thing for me.
Right.
Um,
No,
and
I agree with you. Every song on this album can stand on its own easily.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And and then that leads us to our overall personal thoughts. I mean, obviously we both hate this album. We can't stand it. It's terrible. No, 10 out of 10. Like I said, for me, the pinnacle of the genre. I like it better than the classic Marvin and Stevie records personally. Just superb from front to back. Immaculate production, like I said, lyrics that are timely and timeless. Tightest band you could hope for, backing up one of the great voices in music history. So that's my thoughts on Curtis. What have you got? I'm guessing it's a 10 for you as well, surely.
Absolutely. Curtis belongs on the Mount Rushmore of R&B and soul and funk, along with, Marvin and Al Green and James Brown and Stevie Wonder, and this list could go on and on. He's right up there with them. He is peer level. He is a brilliant musician, largely self-taught. So he's got such an intuitive feel for music. He has such a wonderful such a wonderful songwriter, and his approach to music is so welcoming, so accessible. Um, that in many ways, I think even though he's top shelf along with these other artists, he stands out too. He is his own person. And when you read these horrible reviews or people not, giving Curtis the full credit. Nothing is disingenuous with Curtis. Everything comes from the heart. And I love that passion. It cannot not move you. It's impossible. Do you not, do you not have compassion? Do you not have empathy? What kind of hole in your soul do you have where this album doesn't just grab you by the throat and say, we need to respect each other. We need to love each other. It's a wonderful message. It's a wonderful album. That's what makes it timeless. That's what makes this album timeless, I think. It can be of its time, very political. A lot of the institutional racism and police brutality, it's still going on. That's what that message still resonates. And why? Because it speaks to the human condition. And this album does it directly in a way that's just beautiful. What happened to Curtis after this and is just a tragedy beyond tragedies. I don't know if you know, but later, I think it was in 1990, he was in his mid 40s, and he had a lighting rig while he was on stage fall right on top of him and paralyze him from the neck down. He couldn't play guitar anymore. He did release a couple of albums where he could sing, but he had to sing one line at a time because he needed he couldn't catch his breath fast enough. It's heartbreaking what happened to Curtis. He did not deserve it. Curtis did not get deeply involved with drugs. He wasn't into self harm. He remained a very positive person throughout his life, and it shows up in this album. And I love the man. And I want to thank you so much, Tom, for having me on and talking about this album because I'm glad we shared a passion for this. This is a wonderful album. Just love it.
No, it's been a pleasure, and I think the viewers will agree that I couldn't have had anyone better on to talk about it because great, passionate discussion, and yeah, that's what this series is about. Because if you haven't heard this album, listen to it right now. It is
Please,
one of the all-time greats, one of the best albums of the '70s, and the '70s are one of the best decades for music. So, thank you very
absolutely.
much, Patrick, for coming on.
Thank you, Tom.
Bit longer episode than usual, but I'm happy about that. I'm glad we were able to give Curtis his due because I think more than any other album so far, this is an album that I want people to reach out for, to uncover, to play once, twice, 6 times, 12 times. It deserves that. It's like it's interesting because you talked a lot about the message and I've talked a lot about the musicality, and I think together we've kind of found everything there is to appreciate about the album as or as much as well as you can do within an hour of a chat, right? Like it's
Yes, yes. This
so
album is very special. It's all the things.
exactly. So thank you very much for watching. The next episode, I believe, is going to be on Disintegration by The Cure with a good friend of mine, Rich Lata. So I'm really excited to get that out. So yeah, thank you very much for watching. Plenty of content happening. Album of the Year and Song of the Year series, discography rankings, this series, Anatomy of a Classic, quickfire deep dives, all different kinds of stuff to be found on the channel. Please subscribe, please like, please come back for another video soon. And we will see you soon.